Sup?
In last week's episode, depends on the order that people are listening to these. I know.
I suppose that's true.
When we get down the road. But in the last episode, we started talking about some of the basics of estate planning. We're trying to lay a foundation here in estate planning and create an episode series that people can go back to over and over again to listen to really get these basics down. So we talked about how we've gotten into the weeds on some estate planning stuff. So we wanted to come back and make sure that foundation is built.
Do the high-level overview of a good estate plan.
Especially when you see the surveys that show only a third of Americans have an estate plan in place. Now, that goes up some once you cross over 65 because more people are thinking about it at that point. But still, it's around half.
Right. It's still a small amount.
I'm still amazed at the people that I talk to, that are multimillionaires, and I ask them, okay, what about your will, power of attorney? What, you got all that in place? No, we need to get that done.
Right.
And, they've been talking about getting it done for years.
Absolutely.
And so in the last episode, we talked through the powers of attorney. We talked about the financial power of attorney, the medical power of attorney, the advance directive.
HIPAA release.
And the HIPAA release.
Yeah. So part one of a good estate plan is having a plan for incapacity, right? Within that big heading, the first half is having the documents in place that are going to take care of it.
Yeah.
Right? That's those four. Everybody should have those. The bigger problem with incapacity is paying for it.
Yeah.
Incapacity is expensive.
Yeah.
The most common thing that I hear is I want to stay at home. If I'm incapacitated, I'd like to age in place. I want to stay at home.
There's very few people that if you give them the option, they will say anything other than that.
Right. That's what you hear the most common. But if you can't get off the couch and go to the bathroom and get back to the couch independently, well, either you're going to rely on family or something like that, which, people have jobs and lives and they can't sit around your house 24 hours a day necessarily. Or you're going to pay for that and you're going to pay somebody to sit there at the house 24 hours a day so that when you need to get off the couch to go to the bathroom and get back to the couch, they can help you do that.
Right.
You're going to pay that person probably somewhere between $15 and $30 an hour, depending on your location and going wages and whether you're paying cash, under the table, or whether you're treating them actually like a household employee and doing all the right things. But one way or the other, it's going to get real expensive real fast.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
Maybe you can't stay at home, or maybe you want to look at something like assisted living. Well, that's also quite expensive.
Yes, it is.
Is it cheaper than paying somebody 24 hours a day at your house? Absolutely. Could it still be several $1,000s a month for one person? Also true. And so you've got the assisted living, and then you have the highest level, which would be your nursing home kind of care, skilled nursing home, whatever you want to call it. And depending on your location, that is going to range from $5,000 to $20,000 a month.
Yes.
Give or take.
Yeah. And we talked about the cost of this in an episode we did not long ago where I talked about the Genworth cost of care calculator, which since we've done that episode, they've actually rebranded that. I don't know if they sold it, if Genworth is sold. I haven't looked into the details. Now it's called the Care Scout cost of care calculator, but it's still the same thing. And if you Google Genworth cost of care calculator, it's still going to be the first result that's there. So again, no idea what happened there. But when I look at that, the average median cost in the USA, so nationwide, for a home health aide is just a hair under $6,500 per month. For nursing home care, for a private room, the average is $10,646 a month.
Yeah.
So we're talking, now we're up over $120,000 a year for a private room in a nursing home. And again, that's the average cost.
Right.
Which varies wildly.
Yes.
Depending on your location.
If you're in a rural low income area. My wife's from Louisiana, and people from Louisiana love Mississippi. And the reason why people from Louisiana love Mississippi is because Mississippi generally keeps Louisiana from being dead last.
Right. It's their salvation from the ranking on the very bottom.
or being not number one on the top of a list of things that you don't want.
Of the bad list.
Of the bad list, right?
Yeah.
So Louisiana people are always thankful for Mississippi people because they keep them from being number one or number 50, as the case may be, right?
Yes.
But if you're in rural Mississippi or rural Louisiana, you'll be well below that $10,000 a month. On the other hand, if you're in Connecticut, you're probably going to be twice that average.
It's going to be expensive. Well, in fact, I've got the cost of care calculator in front of me here. A private room in Connecticut, $16,577 per month.
Yeah, so there you go.
Woo! Whereas in Texas, the average is just over $7,000.
Right.
So it's going to cost you almost 10 grand more per month, almost 120 grand per year more in Connecticut than it would in Texas.
That's right.
God bless Texas.
There you go. And so that's where, when we talk about having a plan for incapacity, right? How are you going to pay for it?
Mm-hmm. Right.
Because you've got basically three options. There's three options.
Mm-hmm.
So option one, private pay.
Pay it out of your pocket.
And I'm sure our listeners are more sophisticated than this, I hope. But probably every day, somebody comes into my office, their mom, dad, husband, wife, whoever it is, brother, is probably going to go to a long-term care facility in the near future. And their question to me is, how do I prevent that nursing home from taking all of their things?
Don't let them take the house.
Don't let them take their stuff.
Yeah.
How do I keep them from taking all their stuff?
Yeah.
Or they'll say, how do I keep the government from taking all their stuff?
Yeah.
Right. But there's this idea that if you go into something like a nursing home, that the nursing home like physically collects all of your things.
Yes.
Like they take control of your bank account and your real estate and your IRA, and they take these things, right? It's rent.
Yeah.
It's just rent. And you said the average in Texas was $7,000.
Just over $7,000.
So that's going to be about what, $250 a month?
Private room.
For a private room, $250 give or take. Would that run out to about $7,000 a month? $250 a day?
$250 a day? Yeah, it seems close enough.
Give or take, right? So what's a middle of the road hotel in Dallas?
I have no idea. I don't stay in hotels.
Too fancy for you, huh?
No, I'm a short-term rental guy.
You're a short-term rental guy.
Yeah, I want to have space.
Right. Well, but I mean, if you go,
if I go to a conference, it's usually
if you go to a conference or something like that, right? And you go to a conference hotel, right? Which is going to be better than the Econo Lodge, but it's not the Waldorf.
Yeah, right.
Right. Probably. I mean, in Dallas, Texas, probably $250 a night.
Yep, I would say that's
maybe
right.
$300.
Mm-hmm.
You might, depending on the conference hotel, you might get a free breakfast.
Maybe.
You may have to pay extra for it, but you might get a free breakfast. And somebody will come and make the bed every day for $250, $300. Now, if I went to the nursing home tonight, they're going to give for $300, right? Same $300, same $250, $300. I'm going to get dinner tonight. When I get up in the morning, I'll get breakfast served in room, room service, right? If I want it. Some nurse probably going to come give me a sponge bath.
Yeah.
I dang sure had to pay extra at the hotel in Dallas for that.
I'm sure you did. It wasn't even on the premises.
I'm going to get lunch, right?
Yep.
Somebody will come in and straighten the bed and things.
Right.
And then they're going to ask me for another $300.
Yeah.
just like the hotel.
Yep.
As long as I pay $300 a day, I can stay at either one of them as long as I want.
Yeah.
Right? It's rent. It's just rent. Right? It's expensive rent, but it's still rent.
Yeah.
So the first option is private pay. You just pay the rent, right? And that's feasible for some people.
Yeah.
You know, I have talked to people that came into me with moms going to the nursing home and they're in a panic. And we get to looking at mom's situation, and she you know, was very successful during her lifetime. So she maxes out her Social Security benefit at $3,500 a month. She's got a pension on top of that from her work that's, you know, another $2,000 a month. Her husband was retired military, and she gets the retired military survivor benefit on top of that. And that's another couple of grand. And we look at it, mom's got $7,000 a month just in monthly income.
Yeah.
Well, she's in Texas. The nursing home costs $7,000 a month. Pay for it.
Yep. Done.
Right. Now, not everybody has that kind of recurring income.
Right.
So that maybe they're having to deplete some savings. But even then, if you've got a lot of savings.
Yeah.
Now, that does bring up the question, though, if I've got a private pay, is there a best practices with where I get the money from?
Yeah. Right. That's a little nuance that a lot of people don't pay attention to.
Yeah.
They just do whatever's the least amount of friction and whatever makes sense in that, you know, immediately obvious in front of their eyes at that moment.
Right, because I mean, you know, if you ask me right now, you said, "Hey, John, your rent check is due. It's $7,000." I would probably write a check out of my checking account. So if I'm at the nursing home and they say the rent is due and it's $7,000, my first instinct's probably going to be to write a check out of my checking account.
Yep, makes sense.
And that was probably the wrong answer if I've got some IRA money.
Yeah, right.
Nursing home expense and to a lesser extent assisted living expense, in-home care providers, those are medical expenses. Medical expenses are tax deductible.
Right.
Money you pull out of your IRA is taxable income. So doesn't it make pretty good sense to spend taxable income on tax deductions?
Right. Yep. Because here's the way it works otherwise, John. Let's just assume that I'm your son, all right? Because there's quite an age difference between us here. And so I have you in a facility. You're receiving care, and I'm looking at your assets. You've got $400,000 in your taxable account, your joint account, right? It's got stocks, bonds, so on and so forth in it. And you've got another $2 million in your IRA. All right. So we're looking at that. Now your $7,000 is due. And I, without the knowledge about these qualified medical expenses and doing the Medicare or the medical deduction, I just make the decision to pay that expense out of your taxable account, your joint account.
You've heard, well, I don't want to, in fact, the financial advisor may have even told you.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. Well, don't take that as taxable income.
You don't want to touch that IRA because that's taxable income.
Yeah. And so then you're in the facility for 2 years and you die.
Right. As you do.
Statistics would say. And now I, as your son, am the sole beneficiary of your $2 million IRA.
Right.
And now I have to take that $2 million IRA and spread it out over the next 10 years.
Yep.
So even without growth, you know, I'm having to add an additional $200,000 to my taxable income every year.
Right.
Right.
So you're losing 30% on that.
Yep. The other approach that would have been more optimal is if for those 2 years where you needed that $7,000 a month, if we would have depleted down the IRA. Yep. And then when you filed your taxes, that's likely, there's very few people with enough income to where the qualified medical expense from a long-term care scenario is not going to exceed the 7.5% of their AGI that's required to take that as a deduction.
Yeah, when you have $120,000 worth of medical expenses.
You're going to have a lot of oil royalties coming in to exceed that.
And one thing on that same note is some people some people, maybe they already picked up on that, or maybe they took my advice and they started doing that. But my follow-up to that is when it comes to about December, you're going to have a pretty good idea of what the total income and expenses were for the year. Most of the tax preparation software is available in December.
Yeah.
You can't file your taxes yet.
Yeah.
But it's available to run calculations. And you can run a calculation and see where you're at.
Yeah.
Because you may have excess deduction.
Right.
Right? And all of a sudden you can go back to that financial advisor and say, hey, you know what? Right here at the end of the year, pull out another 50 grand.
Yes, absolutely.
And again, here I would note, kind of like you talked about, right? Like if I'm the parent and you're the son, and I'm 80, which puts you at about 50 in your working years, probably your best working years, right? So you're in the highest tax bracket you're ever going to be. And so here's the other mistake that people will make is they'll look at my tax return, the dad's, right? And they say, well, based on all of this, we've zeroed out dad's taxes.
Yeah.
Right? All the income he got out of the IRA versus his medical expense meant his bottom line on his tax return was zero.
Success.
He owed no taxes.
Yes.
Well, that sounds right. It sounds like that was the right choice. It wasn't the right choice, right? Because every dollar over that zero is getting taxed at the lowest tax bracket.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And wouldn't you rather have it taxed at the lowest tax bracket to dad than you inherit it and it get taxed at the highest tax bracket you're ever going to be in?
Right. Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
So go ahead and pull out another 100 grand.
Yep.
You know, and you can look at the brackets and you can run those calculations in December and say, what's our effective tax rate if we pull out 50?
Yeah.
All right, now let's change that to 100. Let's change that to 150.
Yeah.
Let's change that to 300, right?
Yeah.
And you may be able to significantly reduce that IRA.
So that's
right
an
there at
interesting
the
note that you made. And there are, you mentioned some tax planning softwares that release in December the,
Yeah, pro forma kind of where you can run calculations.
But I'll tell you, there's some free software, and I just covered this in a video on my YouTube channel, where you can get in and look at the current year. In fact, this software right now has 2025 available, where you can start getting in and looking at the year and planning it out ahead.
Yeah.
Right? So you're not just having to look in the rearview mirror. You can look out that windshield, which should always be larger, in my opinion. And yet we talk about it all the time. In fact, just it was either last night or this morning, Karen and I, my wife, we were lamenting the inadequacy of so many tax preparers and how, we have to drive the conversation every year about doing forward-looking tax planning. And what we were talking about was our quarterlies that we have to pay in this year. And what are we supposed to do? Because that's coming up and we've got no guidance, right? And we're not going to get guidance unless we drive that conversation and sit down and say, all right, based on where we are on our P&L, what do you think we need to start paying? Anyway, it's a dumpster fire when it comes to tax advice. And I hear it from clients all over.
Yes.
But there are some free tools. And that free tool that I was talking about, it's the Tax Act free tax calculator, where you can look at current year and you're not just looking at prior year. There's some other tools out there, but most of them will force you to look at prior year, right? So starting in about December of 2024, you can look at 2024. But in December of 24 or probably January of 25, you're not going to be able to look at 25 like you can with this Tax Act.
Right.
And that allows you to do much more proactive planning and get ahead. Now,
and Tax Act's been around for a long time. That's a good software. Actually, when I was in law school, I did tax returns for my law school friends.
oh yeah.
I did their tax returns, and I used Tax Act to do it.
So I don't know anything about Tax Act, except they used to be owned by this company. I actually did some consulting work for Blue Cora, which is the tech company that used to own Tax Act. Now I think they've been sold to a private equity firm. just so people know, this is not some
everything else,
affiliate relationship
right?
here.
Yeah, we're not getting a chunk.
And
Tax Act people, you're welcome to send us money.
Yeah, that's right. Yes,
but no, we're not.
they do want you to use them to file your taxes.
Of course.
So they're like a TurboTax or something like
This
that.
is a lead generator.
Oh, for sure.
But it's a good lead generator.
Oh, it is.
In the sense that you can use it and you don't have to succumb to the lead.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, the one other thing I'll say about the self-insuring aspect of long-term care, this is something that needs to be built into your retirement income plan. Mm-hmm. This is not something that you need to leave to chance. Right? Because there's a lot of things to consider here. So we talk to people quite often about Roth conversions. And, in many cases, the idea is, well, if converting some is good, converting all is optimal. And it's not, because you want to look at what's the present value of what I think I'm going to need for long-term care. Now let's apply whatever we think the inflation rate is going to be to that long-term care cost. And let's look at it at the last 2 years of this plan. Now we know how much we need to leave in those IRAs to cover that long-term care cost. And that needs to be built into your plan. And it doesn't need to be some static amount that the plan decided what you're going to use. It needs to be something you can modify based on the state that you're going to be in. And you can, again, get that number through that Care Scout cost of care. And even the more specific location, because they have it broken down into regions in there. So you can get really granular on planning this out. And then you need to figure out how long do you want to plan for, right? Is 2 years enough? Is 3 years enough? I talked to a guy the other day. He said, well, I'm doing at least 15 years of long-term care. And I thought, well, that's probably, you're wasting some spending capacity early.
Sure.
But he had experience with someone who had needed care for 15 years, and that's what he was going to do. Yeah. So lots of assumptions you should be able to build into a plan. And I know a lot of our listeners are Bolden users, which used to be New Retirement. There is a workaround where you can do this in Bolden, and I do plan to release a video on that coming up soon, because I think planning for long-term care is a big piece that a lot of people are missing out on. And if you're going to self-insure, which I think is the right move for a lot of people, it needs to be a component of that plan where you've already baked in some of that cost.
That's exactly right. So obviously, if what we're talking about is self-insuring, then the opposite of self-insuring is insuring.
Transferring the risk to someone else.
Right, transferring that risk. And so this is where you get the long-term care insurance.
Right.
Not to go all into the weeds on that, it's long-term care insurance, right? You buy an insurance policy, mm-hmm. You pay for an insurance policy, and then when you need it, you go through the process of making a claim against the policy, right. Just like you would with your homeowner's insurance or your auto insurance or all of your other insurance policies.
Yeah.
Couple of things to think about with the long-term. So first of all, you have the traditional long-term care insurance, right? Which mm-hmm. is just like every insurance. You have a monthly premium, you pay it forever.
Yeah.
If you never use it, you don't get anything. If you do get it, then there you go. But a couple of things on it. Just this week, I've already had a lady come in. She is in assisted living. She has been paying on a long-term care insurance policy for years. Mm-hmm. In the last 3 or 4 years, her premiums on that policy, 1 year went up 68%. The next year went up 52% from the previous year's 61% increase, right? So a policy that she originally purchased that was costing her like $5,000 a year is like $22,000 a year right now.
It's crazy.
Which is insane. And that's really beyond her payment ability.
Right.
The good thing is now she's in long-term care, and once she makes a claim against the policy, that'll terminate her continuing obligation to make premiums.
Right.
However, here is a woman who is in long-term care, and the volume of paperwork involved in making the claim, right? She's sitting there in my office, and she has a bucket, a plastic bin of papers, because about every week she'll get another letter from, we need this document returned, and we need it by this date. We need this document returned. We need it by this date. she doesn't know what these documents are. She can't understand the letters that are being written and why they need this stuff. She has no real access to mail services. It's not like she's sitting at home perfectly capable, right? Her kids don't live around. There's nobody to help her really, The facility doesn't want to get involved in that necessarily because they don't want to make a mistake that it would be her fault, which is why they sent her to me. So like most insurance, they don't make any money by paying you.
Right. Yeah. No.
And if you have experienced filing a claim for homeowners insurance, filing a claim for car insurance, particularly filing a claim in a health insurance context, you know how difficult insurance companies can be.
Oh, yeah.
So that's the first thing that I would mention.
And how many gotchas there are
Yes.
in this contractual language that they use.
Yes. So that's the one thing to consider is you're not going to be at your best when it comes time to make the claim on the policy.
Right. Yeah. You better hope you have some help.
And so, you will need help on that. There are some alternative policies out there. There's what they call the hybrid policies.
Mm-hmm.
That's essentially a life insurance policy with a long-term care rider.
Mm-hmm.
The sales pitch on that is, well, if you don't ever need the long-term care, then you get the life insurance.
Right.
You get the death benefit.
Yeah.
And
I'll just add to that, it's an extremely expensive way to buy a long-term care insurance.
Right.
Yeah. It just is. And it also is an inefficient way to buy life insurance.
Right. It's the worst. It's the worst of both.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. I haven't seen one yet that really made sense.
Right.
So I think it's important when you're looking at that to carefully. Here's the thing about insurance in general, though, John. Insurance is not meant to do anything other than transfer risk.
That's it.
You pay a premium to transfer some of that risk. And you really only want to transfer risk about things that you can't insure on your own.
Correct.
Right? So there's, for example, pet insurance. I don't know, maybe my dogs are healthier than most, but I don't know what I spend on those dogs every year at the vet. It seems like it's a lot. We just took 2 dogs to the vet the other day, and I think our bill was around $1,000.
Mm-hmm.
And that was for whatever they do every year, give them those big pills that keeps the fleas and ticks, the heartworms.
All the things, right.
And then whatever, right? But I can self-insure against my pets going to the vet.
Right.
Long-term care is one of those things that absolutely can devastate you financially. So it probably makes sense to transfer some of that risk if you don't have the funds to pay for it yourself. But with that said, that's the way you need to view it, a pure transference of risk, and not something that's got the bells and whistles and the return of premium and the stuff that builds up cash value and all of this stuff that appeals to you, but really just makes the insurance companies a lot of money.
Correct. Right. And so, and you got to consider the nature of your assets.
Mm-hmm.
A person with $2 million in their IRA and a person with $2 million worth of rental properties.
Yeah.
And these two different people, they have identical net worth, but they have substantially different assets.
Right.
Right? The IRA, it can easily be liquidated to pay for care.
Absolutely.
$2 million worth of rental properties do not.
Right.
They cannot easily be liquidated.
Mm-hmm.
They probably don't generate enough money to pay for the care. And so that's a situation where, I understand the insurance
right
portion of that, right? I would insure real estate. I wouldn't insure cash with cash.
Yeah.
That doesn't make a lot of sense.
Right. Yeah. No. Mm-mm.
Right. And so that's, you got to look at the character of the asset. So all of that was that. So you can self-insure.
Right.
You can insure. And then the third option is government assistance.
Mm-hmm.
And for the most part, that's going to fall under the one category of Medicaid.
Yes.
Medicare will pay for some rehabilitation
mm-hmm.
in a nursing home, up to about 100 days.
Yeah.
I say up to because it's not 100 days. It's up to 100 days. But basically, Medicare is health insurance. And if you haven't gotten better in 100 days, you're not going to get any better according to Medicare. So it's not health care any longer. It's rent, and they don't pay for rent.
Right.
Right? That's a simple way to get that in your head. Medicaid will pay the rent.
Yeah.
But it is a need-based program. And I'm not going to get into all of the weeds on this, but let's say, we'll take your example of the person with the $2 million in their IRA, right? Well, you're talking to the person with the $2 million in the IRA, and they came to you and they said, well, should I self-insure or should I get long-term care insurance? Certainly one option was just to self-insure, right?
Right.
It's a lot of liquid money in the IRA. And if you were just looking at it from, say, the financial advisor's perspective, and you weren't trying to get a commission on a sale for some long-term care insurance, you would probably tell that person to just, you're going to self-insure.
Right.
Talk about the tax benefits of pulling it out during the time and all of that. If that person lived in Texas, Florida, Georgia, Idaho, Mississippi, New York, North Dakota, Rhode Island, South Carolina, Texas, Vermont.
That's quite a list there.
That's a pretty good little list. What's unique about all of the states that I just listed is that none of them count IRAs towards your eligibility for Medicaid, at least under certain circumstances. Like for Texas, if you're in RMD age, so you're 72 or better, your IRA does not count towards your eligibility.
Wow.
So that person with the $2 million IRA, if that was their only asset, they have the option of both.
Yeah.
Self-insuring or Medicaid. Either one.
Yeah.
Right? But they didn't know it.
Yeah.
Because they just assumed that Medicaid would not be an option for them. How can somebody with a $2 million IRA qualify for Medicaid?
For sure.
That's ridiculous.
Yeah, that's a needs-based
And
program.
I'm not saying it's not ridiculous,
Right.
but it is the rule,
Yeah.
at least in one of these states.
Yeah.
Right? And so, now I bet if you were talking to the person and you said, hey, look, you can private pay or you could buy long-term care insurance. And they may say, well, you know what? I really want that IRA to go to the kids. I don't want to see it depleted. And so I'm willing to insure my cash with cash.
Yeah.
And so all of a sudden they decide, you know what? I think I need to get the long-term care insurance. If you had told them the one more thing though.
Yeah.
Oh, and by the way, the IRA doesn't count for Medicaid. So you could keep the IRA and still qualify for Medicaid. And then all of it goes to your kids. All the IRA money goes to the kids. The state pays for your care. And you never had to write a check for an insurance premium.
Yeah.
They didn't buy the insurance that time.
Yep. Right. Yep. So a few questions on the Medicaid strategy. And this is something that we've talked about before, but we've never had this debate. All right. So
Let's hear it.
I'm going to take an opposing view here.
Okay.
And I want you to throw back
See
your
what-
objections
all right,
to this.
See what you got.
Medicaid is welfare. And if I'm hiding assets to qualify for Medicaid, that's fraud.
Correct. No, it's not fraud.
Okay.
So, a couple of things on that. So, to the fraud concept, right? Absolutely not fraud. If I buy a house with a mortgage, when I pay my taxes, I can, under the rules that the IRS has written, I can deduct the interest and I get to pay less tax to the federal government. Right?
Right.
That is not a loophole. That's the law.
Yeah.
Right? One of the things that drives me nuts is when I hear particularly pundits talk about loopholes that are not loopholes. They're the law.
Yeah. Right.
A loophole is something that's outside of the law. It's something that was never intended.
Right.
But when you say you get to deduct interest and people deduct interest, they're not taking advantage of a loophole.
Right.
They're taking advantage of a law.
That was the intended purpose of that law.
Right. Medicaid, at least in some states, does not count an IRA towards your eligibility. That's the law. That's the rule.
Right.
Right? And so if you apply for Medicaid and you happen to have a $2 million IRA, that's just the rules. You didn't make the rules.
Yeah.
You qualify for Medicaid with your $2 million IRA. You just happen to live in the state of Texas, and the state of Texas says, that's fine. We will pay for your care even though you have a $2 million IRA. We're going to take your RMD and apply it towards the cost of your care, but we're not going to touch the underlying balance in that IRA. That's just the law, all right? Now, that's to your fraud, but there's an underlying comment that you had there too, which is that it's distasteful.
Yes.
That person with
welfare
that person with $2 million has no business getting on welfare.
Yep. Because in many cases, John, let me just add this in there. Let me just add a little flavor to the response you're about to give.
Mm-hmm.
I can guarantee you that this person with that $2 million in their IRA, there's a high likelihood that at least in their recent history, they've never been on food stamps. They've never received any kind of other government care at all, nor would they ever dream of doing that. And yet when it comes to Medicaid, it seems like there's a lot higher willingness to accept that needs-based program.
Well, and so I'll tell you, this comment that you've made to me, I actually got at a speech one time. So I was giving a speech. One of the people in the room, I'm talking about Medicaid and stuff, and one of the guys in the room, and he owned a chain of hamburger stores. Mm-hmm. And very wealthy individual. And he raised his hand and he said, John, it sounds to me like you're just getting everybody on welfare. I said, fair enough. I mean, that is definitely one way to look at it.
Right.
I said, but let me give you a counter position. I said, this was a lunch. This was like a Kiwanis Club or a Lions Club speech, so everybody had lunch, right?
Yeah.
And I said, I've already had lunch today, so I'm not hungry. I said, but I bet if I gave you $5, you'd sell me a hamburger, given that you own a chain of the restaurants.
Right.
I said, so here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to give you the $5, but I don't want the hamburger right now. I'm not hungry. Now, fast forward 20 years, and I come back to you, and I say, hey, you know what? I'm hungry. I'd like that hamburger I paid for. Now, you're going to look at me and you're going to say, but John, you lived frugally, worked hard, saved your money, put some back for a rainy day. And I know what your finances are. You can afford another hamburger.
Yeah.
So I'm not going to give you the one you paid for. You can afford another hamburger. Well, kiss my ass. I paid for the first one.
Yeah.
Right? The guy that has that $2 million in the IRA paid for the Medicaid program.
Yep.
Period. End of story. He paid for it.
I can see that. I can see that side of it for sure.
And so I can say, if I pay for something, I would like to benefit from something.
Yep.
When I donate to charity, I expect nothing in return.
Mm-hmm.
Right? But I don't voluntarily give my taxes to the federal government.
Right. Yeah.
That's not a donation on my part. I'm paying for stuff. Mm-hmm. And I understand that I need to pay for stuff. But I also think that I should be able to get the benefit of the things that I pay for.
Yeah. Yeah. Understood.
And so I don't have a problem with somebody who has paid for a government program being able to access that government program.
Yeah.
And if they can maneuver their estate in a bit, one way or the other, so that they are more likely to be eligible for that government benefit, I'm also comfortable with that. Yeah. And as long as they're doing that within the laws that the government made, it's dang sure not fraud.
Yeah. Yeah.
So there's the answer to, there's the point counterpoint.
John, that didn't hit a nerve, did it?
Oh yeah, I do. I do
Because
have,
you hear it quite often, I'm
I do
sure.
have some opinions on that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
And now I will say, I have a line, personally.
Yeah.
Not like a specific line, but I had a guy come in, and his wife was in a nursing home, and this was a few years back. The nursing home was costing $5,000 a month, right? Maybe $5,500, but call it $60,000-$70,000 a year. The guy comes in and he wants to come in and get his wife on Medicaid. His net worth was over $5 million, most of which was investable assets. IRA, brokerage accounts. I mean, 300,000 of it was a house, but the rest was stocks, bonds, CDs, cash.
Yeah.
Could I have gotten the wife on Medicaid? Yes. Did I tell him that? No. Now, I didn't directly tell him that it's not possible, but I explained the fact that I would have to do some significant manipulations to his investments, none of which would be good from an investment perspective. And on $5 million, if you're just getting 5%, you're paying for the care,
Right.
right? And without even, why are we having a Medicaid conversation when you've got $5 million worth of investable assets? If that whole $5 million was in an IRA, I mean, would she have qualified for Medicaid? Yeah.
Yeah.
Was that? But it just wasn't right, and so I talked him out of it. Could it have happened? Yes. Did I talk him out of it because in his particular situation, it just didn't make sense?
Now, John, I know we have listeners out there right now who are saying, but wait a minute. What about the example of the guy with $2 million in the IRA, and he paid for it, right?
Mm-hmm.
He paid for that burger 20 years ago.
$5 million.
So did the $5 million guy.
Yep.
And so drawing a line there and saying the $5 million guy shouldn't, but the $2 million guy, yeah, it's probably okay. That seems to be a bit of a murky line there.
And that's why I said it's not a bright line rule.
Yeah.
It's not a bright line rule.
You just didn't feel like doing it that day, right?
Well, I look at it somewhat like, with the way the cost of the care has gone up.
Right.
Right. If I'm looking at the guy with the $2 million IRA, but that's his IRA, right? And so his Social Security is very limited.
Yeah.
Maybe, and so he's going to be burning 60, 70,000 a year, right? Well, what if he's relatively young? What if he has a surviving spouse? Could he burn half of that? Possibly.
Right.
Can you burn $1 million in long-term care? Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I know that has to be a balancing act, right? And I'm not just trying to intentionally needle you here, because I can imagine how the delicate nature of doing that, because you would certainly have those people that come in for the sole purpose of greed.
Right.
Sole purpose, not trying to take advantage of something. They have pinched those pennies all their life, and they want to stick it as hard as they can. These are the same people that fired
Correct.
their last CPA because he wouldn't willingly commit fraud. I mean, we've all seen those kind of people.
And so you get that, you can pick that up
Absolutely.
in an appointment.
Yeah, for sure.
And you're looking at at least you should be looking at all of these factors,
Yeah.
right? Because is it possible to get somebody on Medicaid that has lots and lots of money? Yes. Is that the right thing to do? And I'm not even just talking morally, right?
Yeah.
But if I have to start tweaking their investments in order to get things put in the right way for Medicaid, and that reduces their otherwise growth potential, that just may not make sense.
Yeah. I understand.
Right? It just financially, not considering the moral aspect of it or anything, just the financial aspect of it, it just may not make sense. If we're having to liquidate appreciated stocks over here in order to get Medicaid over here, well, what's the tax consequence going to be?
Yeah.
I mean, I've had situations where, I'm like, look, we can get this person on Medicaid, but you're looking at a tax consequence. Maybe somebody's in a state that, like Arkansas, for example, that does count the IRA. And we're going to have to liquidate the IRA. Well, I'm saying, okay, your mom's going to burn savings at $30,000 a year. When we pull out this IRA, she's going to lose $30,000 to taxes.
Yeah.
Which means even if I get her on Medicaid, it's going to take you a year to recoup. It's going to take you a year of Medicaid savings to recoup the tax loss off the front end. Is your mom going to be alive in a year?
Yeah.
And they're like, oh, no, not with her health. Well, then why would you incur a $30,000 tax bill to qualify for somebody for Medicaid when it would take a year of Medicaid benefits to pay for the tax loss? Right. So this is a big picture. But to all of this, to wrap all of this up, you need to have looked at all of these options.
Yes.
Right? What is your ability to self-fund or private pay for your care? What are the insurance options? What are the government assistance options?
Yeah.
And all three of those factors and your financial situation, the makeup of your assets, your retirement income, all of that is put together. And then the people you're talking to should be able to say, here's what private pay looks like. Here's what insurance looks like. Here's what government benefits looks like in your particular situation.
Absolutely.
And now you can make a choice.
Well, and one of the things that I do have an issue with, even though I pushed you a little bit on the Medicaid, is for the people who would ignore that, right, and never tell you that was that third option.
Correct.
Because they have some sort of self-imposed ethical issue with using Medicaid, and so they never mention it because they're imposing their values on you, which I think is a horrible mistake for an advisor in any role to make. And you need to explain what all of their options are and let those chips fall.
That's right. And that's particularly in the Medicaid context, that's particularly prevalent out there. Two reasons on that. One is people imposing their own moral judgment on others.
Yeah.
Right? Which is just bad. The second is a mistaken understanding. Yeah. So back in 2005, I believe it was the Omnibus Act of 2005 put in by Clinton. I think that's where this came in. But they made a bunch of changes to the Medicaid rules. Mm-hmm. And part of a lot of those changes were because of, for lack of a better term, loopholes that were being utilized to get more people on Medicaid. That was with the aging population that was causing some economic problems. So they did some major overhaul to the Medicaid rules in 2005. Buried in there was a law that made it a criminal offense to assist somebody with qualifying for Medicaid. Advise them. I mean, even if you just told them, hey, if you do this, you'll qualify for Medicaid, would be a criminal offense. The drafters of that law had never looked at the other document that we have in this country called the Constitution.
Yes.
Which
that's not important.
Which there's a section in there on rights, and there's one at the top of the list that you can say whatever the hell you want.
Yes,
and it's not a crime.
Yes,
right. Particularly about the government.
Yeah,
and so although that law was in there, it was immediately determined to be unconstitutional.
Yeah.
But the second half of that, of it being immediately unconstitutional, did not actually spread out through the wilds. And so there is a segment of the professional community, lawyers, CPAs, financial advisors, that think it's illegal to talk to you about Medicaid. And so that's not true.
Yeah.
But that is a limiting factor in there as well.
So, goodness, John, here we are an hour and a half-ish or so into the first part
yes.
of the of the estate planning.
We're 2 parts in to the first part of our 3-part episode.
Yep.
On the parts of the how to build a perfect estate plan.
And I will bet that some of this is going to find its way on the cutting room floor, but there's a lot of rabbit trails that we identified that we could have gone down.
Absolutely. Oh, yeah.
And when we could be here talking about this for a long time.
We could do a 3-podcast episode on Medicaid.
Yeah, for sure.
And still not touch
maybe
everything.
we should.
We might need to at one point.
Because that is an area that I think people ought to know more about, because as you've already noted, there's a lot of people who impose their moral judgments and say, no, we're not talking to you about that. And so a lot of people never find out about some of those options.
Well, and I guess if somebody's listening and they say, yeah, that's exactly what you need to do, then you need to go to bigpictureretirement.com, go up in the right-hand corner where it says ask a question. And you don't have to ask a question. You can make demands.
We're not guaranteed.
Make demands. Get on there and say, I want to know more about this topic.
Yes.
And we may or may not listen to your demands.
Well, if it's nice, we probably will.
If it comes with praise, I've said this before.
Right.
If it comes with praise, it is much more likely to find its way onto the show.
No question. Well, we're going to wind this episode up, and then when we come back in the next episode, we're going to start talking about non-probate transfers and tax considerations.
Yeah,
so
phase
that's
2.
Moving on to phase 2.
Phase 2 of a
estate planning.
Perfect estate plan.
Goodness gracious. All right, very good. Well, John, I can't leave here without talking about the reviews that we've been getting. Some fantastic reviews coming through, especially on Apple Podcasts, where I've told people that's where we get 70, 80% of our audio listens. And now that we're on YouTube as well, the best review that someone can give us is a like and a subscribe, and to tell a friend about it.
Absolutely.
Right? To share this
it.
channel with someone, because
Share
most
it.
of them don't even know we're on YouTube. They just thought Big Picture Retirement was this audio-only podcast.
Send some links to your friends.
Do that. Well, very good. Well, we will be here bringing you to and through your very own Big Picture Retirement. Thanks so much for listening.